22. The poem that Lamech composed for his wives Ge4. 23, 24 reflects the violent spirit of that day. Lamech's poem run. Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give ear to my saying. A man I have killed for wounding me, yes, a young man for giving me a blow. If 7 times Cain is to be avenged, then Lamech 70 times and 7. Evidently Lamech was presenting a case of self-defense, pleading that his act was not one of deliberate murder, like that of Cain. Lamech claimed that, in defending himself, he had killed a man who struck and wounded him. Therefore, his poem stood as a plea for immunity against anyone desiring to get revenge against him for killing his attacker. It appears that none of Cain's descendants, which would include Lamech's offspring, survived the flood. 2. A descendant of Seth, son of Methuselah and father of Noah. Ge5. 25, 28, 29. 1ch1. 1-4 The lifetimes of this Lamech and Adam likewise overlapped. Lamech had faith in God, and after calling his son's name Noah, probably meaning rest, consolation, he uttered the words, "This one will bring us comfort from our work and from the pain of our hands resulting from the ground which Jehovah has cursed." Ge5. 29 These words found fulfillment when the curse on the ground was lifted during Noah's lifetime. Ge8. 21 Lamech had other sons. Text to acute miritra longo. Lamentations, Book of 193, and shows that Jehovah is good to the one hoping in him. Or 3. 22, 25. Name. In the Hebrew this book is named by the opening word a middle ka, which means how. The Septuagint translators called the book through meaning dirges, laments. In the Babylonian Talmud Bava Batra 14b it is identified by the term kai middle note, meaning dirges, elegies, and it is called Lamentations Latin by Jerome. The English name Lamentations comes from this latter title. Place in the Bible canon. In the Hebrew canon the Book of Lamentations is usually counted in among the 5 Megil middle Lot rolls, consisting of the Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. However, in ancient copies of the Hebrew scriptures the Book of Lamentations is said to have followed the Book of Jeremiah, as it does in English Bibles of today. Writer. In the Greek Septuagint this book is introduced with the words, "And it occurred that, after Israel had been taken captive and Jerusalem had been desolated, Jeremiah sat down weeping and lamented with this lamentation over Jerusalem and said." The Targums also identify Jeremiah as the writer, introducing it as follows. Jeremiah the prophet and great priest said. The introduction in the Clementine recension of the Latin Vulgate is, "And it occurred that, after Israel had been led away into captivity and Jerusalem was deserted, Jeremiah the prophet sat weeping and wailed with this lamentation over Jerusalem. And sighing with a bitter spirit, and moaning woefully, he said." Style. The 5 chapters of the Book of Lamentations consist of 5 poems, the first 4 of which are acrostics. The Hebrew alphabet has 22 distinct letters consonants, and in each of the first 4 chapters of Lamentations successive verses begin with different ones of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Chapters 1, 2, and 4 each have 22 verses arranged alphabetically according to the Hebrew alphabet, verse 1 beginning with the first Hebrew letter Aleph, verse 2 commencing with the second letter, Bet, and so forth, to the end of the alphabet. Chapter 3 has 66 verses, and in it 3 successive verses begin with the same Hebrew letter before passing on to the next letter. In chapters 2, 3, and 4 there is a reversal of the letters E and P. There they are not in the same order as in Lamentations 1 and PS 119. But this does not mean that the inspired writer of Lamentations made a mistake. It has been observed in a consideration of this matter. Still less does the irregularity in question permit of being attributed to an oversight on the part of the composer. For the irregularity is repeated in 3 poems. It is rather connected with another circumstance. For we find in other alphabetic poems also, especially the older ones, many deviations from the rule, which undeniably prove that the composers bound themselves rigorously by the order of the alphabet only so long as it fitted into 5 poems lamenting the tragedy that befell Jerusalem and its inhabitants in 607 BCE at the hands of the Babylonians, written by Jeremiah immediately after the destruction of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is personified as a widow bereaved of her children, with no one to give comfort. 1-22 She acknowledges that her sin against Jehovah is the reason for her distress. She prays for the Almighty to punish those who rejoice over her suffering. Jehovah has acted in anger against Jerusalem too. 1-22 He has thrown Jerusalem down from heaven to earth. He has spurned his sanctuary and shown no respect for king and priest. As a result, passers-by are amazed at what has happened to the city that was the perfection of prettiness. The able-bodied man, representing the nation, speaks of his affliction, yet expresses hope. 1-66 He describes his present desperate situation. Nevertheless, he is confident that Jehovah will textoi acute miritra longo. Lamp 194 The course of thought without any artificiality. Commentary on the Old Testament, by C. F. Keel and F. Delitzsch, 1973, Volume 8, The Lamentations of Jeremiah, p. 338. Among examples then cited are Psalm 34, where the war verse is lacking, and Psalm 145, which omits the nun verse. The fact that strict adherence to the alphabetic arrangement of Hebrew letters is not present in these inspired writings should cause no concern. While the use of acrostics undoubtedly served as a memory aid, the message was of primary importance, and thought content took precedence over any literary device. Lamentations chapter 5 is not an acrostic poem, though it does contain 22 verses, the same number as the distinct letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Time of composition. The vividness of Lamentations shows that the book was written shortly after Jerusalem's fall in 607 BCE, while the events of the Babylonian siege and burning of Jerusalem were still fresh in the mind of Jeremiah. There is general agreement that the Book of Lamentations was penned soon after Jerusalem's fall, and it is reasonable to conclude that the writing of it was completed in 607 BCE. Fulfillment of prophecy. Fulfilled in Jerusalem's experiences vividly portrayed in the Book of Lamentations were the words of Deuteronomy 28. 63-65. The fulfillment of various other divine prophecies and warnings is also shown in this book. For example, compare Lamentations 1:2 with Jeremiah 30:14. Lamentations 2:17 with Leviticus 26:17. Lamentations 2:20 with Deuteronomy 28:53. Contents. In the first chapter, beginning with verse 12, Jeremiah personifies Jerusalem, God's covenant woman Zion, as speaking. Issa 62. 1-6 She is now desolate, as though widowed and bereft of her children, a captive woman put into forced labor as a slave. In chapter 2, Jeremiah himself speaks. In chapter 3, Jeremiah pours out his feelings, transferring them to the figure of the nation as an able-bodied man. In chapter 4, Jeremiah continues his lament. In the 5th chapter, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are pictured as speaking. The expressions of acknowledgement of sin, their hope and confidence in Jehovah, and their desire to turn to the right way, as portrayed throughout, were not the actual feelings of the majority of the people. However, there was a remnant like Jeremiah. So the view expressed in the Book of Lamentations is a true evaluation of Jerusalem's situation as God saw it. The Book of Lamentations is therefore a true and valuable record, inspired by God. Lamp. A vessel used to produce artificial light. It has a wick for burning flammable liquids such as oil, the wick drawing up the fluid by capillary attraction to feed the flame. Wicks were made of flax. Issa 42. 3. 43. 17. Peeled rush, or hemp. Olive oil was the fluid generally burned in ancient lamps. X 27. 20. The oil from the terebinth tree was also used. The 5 discrete virgins of Jesus illustration each is the lamp and the receptacle containing oil. Mount 25. 1-4 Those who came to arrest Jesus were also carrying lamps and torches. Joe 18. 3. Ordinarily, household lamps were made of earthenware, although bronze lamps have also been discovered in Palestine. The common Canaanite lamp was shaped like a saucer, having a rounded bottom and vertical rim. Pictures, Volume 2, p. 952 Its rim was slightly pinched on one side, where the wick rested. Sometimes the rim was pinched at the four corners, providing 4 places for wicks. In time, lamps were made in somewhat different shapes, some being closed except for 2 holes, one on top near the center for filling the vessel with oil and the other being a spout for holding the wick. Certain lamps had a loop handle at the end opposite the spout, sometimes in a horizontal, but more often in a vertical position. The Greco-Roman type frequently bore mythological human or animal forms, but the Jews made lamps bearing such designs o textoi acute miritra longo. Lamp 195 Early saucer lamps were generally a shade of brown. Varieties made in the 1st century CE were of various colors, including light brown, red-orange, and grey. Also, there were those of Roman times that were covered with red glaze. The lamps generally used in homes and other buildings might be placed in a niche in the wall, or on a shelf on a wall or pillar, or they might be suspended from the ceiling by means of the cord. Sometimes they were placed on clay, wooden, or metal stands. Such lampstands permitted the light to radiate throughout the room. 2 Chi 4. 10. Mount 5. 15. Mr. 4. 21. The use of candles is not mentioned in the Bible. Lamp oil, a liquid, was used to produce light. Hence, frequent rendering by the King James Version of the Hebrew na and the Greek word lidashk, knows as candle is inappropriate, as at Job 29. 3 and Luke 11. 33, where modern translations such as at, NW, RS fittingly use lamp. Sanctuary use. In Israel's tabernacle, the lampstand was made of gold and differed in design from common household lampstands. Made according to Jehovah God's instructions X25. 31, it was ornamented with alternating knobs and blossoms and had 3 branches on each side of a central shaft, thus providing for 7 holders in which small lamps were placed. Only fine beaten olive oil was used in these lamps. X37. 17-24. 27. 20 Later, Solomon had 10 golden lampstands and a number of silver lampstands made